And it is time for another edition of CoExist. This is a podcast and also a visual on Facebook on IQ Podcast, at IQ Podcast on Facebook. This is Conversation for Conservation. And I'm so excited because every month, I introduce people to amazing world beaters, people who see something and do something. And this is no exception today because my very special guest is Debbie Ethell. She is the founder of KOTA, KOTA, Keepers of the Ark, basically it stands for, a foundation that educates and spreads awareness of elephants, her deep love for elephants. She is a best-selling published author with a memoir called The Will of Heaven, an inspiring true story about elephants, alcoholism, and hope, which is stunning to say the least. You are a conservation scientist. I mean, you had your list of stuff that you've achieved and done is extraordinary. But what is so extraordinary about my special guest, Debbie, is that you took this circuitous route to changing the world, like this crazy story that you think, oh no, that didn't happen. Oh yeah, it happened. It happened in her life. And, after reading your book, we're going to be talking about everything, but after reading your book, I was so aware that people are meant to go through certain trials in life to get to where they are to achieve greatness. Had you not gone through what you had gone through, you would not be just kicking ass and taking names right now in the world. You literally had to go over that because if you had a smoother route in life, I don't think you would be who you are today and what you've achieved. So, welcome, Debbie. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again. And thanks for that great lead in. Gosh, how can you compete with that?
Well, you deserve every good word. And so Debbie and I connected and we finally said, hey, let's have dinner. So we had dinner at the Lazy Dog in Mission Valley. And when you sit down and meet somebody and you feel like I've known this girl my whole life, I totally understand her. I've met her for a few minutes and I totally understand this person. So
That's
we have,
great. Right back
yeah,
at you.
yeah. And so we have so much to talk about. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with you at the age of 26, like this very important time in your life. Then we're going to go back to your childhood, and then we're going to take you to where you are today. So at 26, in your book, the opening is brutally honest. It's this whole book is so honest, and we'll get into that. But it says, you thanked the arresting officer by saying, thank you for stopping me when I couldn't save myself. There were so many amazing things in this book and so many eye-opening and honest honesty like I haven't seen in so long. People may think they're honest, but then there are people who are brutally honest. So Debbie, let's start with you at 26 because we're going to talk about your book, your foundation, and how you got to where you can do work with the elephants that you love.
Oh, wow. So at 26 years old, I was homeless. I was living in my car. I had been arrested multiple times. Luckily, not with a felony, but all of my closest friends are multi felons. So, my prospects didn't look good. I had tried and gotten either kicked out or dropped out of more 4 colleges, I believe, and really was just completely lost and had no idea at that time. I was just addicted. I was addicted to drugs. I was addicted to alcohol. And I kept thinking I was just having some run of bad luck. That's not what happened. And so it was an act of intervention in a strange way. It was being arrested for my last DUI that it didn't get me sober, but consequences do kind of lead to sobriety, right? And so it wasn't exactly that got me sober, but it was finally having everything sort of stripped away from me, my dignity, my self-esteem, all of my dreams gone. The elephants I followed since I was 8 years old, it was just like, I didn't know how to survive. I didn't know how I was going to continue. So it really was this strange, incredible act of, my final night, I tried to take everything that anybody was giving me. I was trying to just escape again, just like I normally did. My family had cut me out completely. I mean, they cut all ties with me. So going back to family was not an option. And I need to say, because I always forget to say this, I deserved that because I showed up to their house and I stole everything they had. And so, and not the least of which their own dignity. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
it was, so, kudos to them. I mean, they went to Al-Anon, they figured out how to lay lines in the sand. They were giving me those consequences that were necessary. And I finally got sober. I went into a treatment center, which led into a halfway house, which I lived in for a year. I had only the clothes I was wearing for 9 long months.
Mhm.
So, it really, I am a little bit, I guess, unique in that way, in that, I don't look at people ever and assume. I try not to ever assume where they've come from, because I look like this today. And I think people can look at me and go, oh, she's.
Nobody would ever know. Nobody would ever know to look at you that you literally walked through hell. You literally walked through the flames and made it out on the other side. You know,
Right.
it we live in a time where people are bombarded with, social media and, fake news and, just all sorts of stuff. We're so immersed and overwhelmed by things that we literally have lost ourselves in all of this because we are judging ourselves based on what others think, what's the fad, what's this. And I think everybody, whether or not you have an addiction problem or anything like that, is almost irrelevant. What this is getting back to the very core and essence of who you are,
Mhm.
stripped down to the bone, where you actually say, ah, this is who Debbie really is. And you put layers back on building this amazing life with impact in the world and changing people. Your story impacts people and your story impacts animals. And I love how your book opens. It said, "What would Eleanor do? Contemplating the mess I'd made of my life." Well, it turns out Eleanor is not some sweet aunt or a friend or anything like that. She turns out to be an elephant that you have followed since the age of 8. So you are this person who's actually tracked the lives intimately of 400 elephants over your life
Yeah.
because you found that you had a connection with elephants at a very early age.
Mhm.
So we started your podcast here at 26. So let's go back to the beginning and see how all these pieces tie together.
So at the very beginning, I watched a nature show on PBS about elephants. I was 8 years old. I was transfixed. But one of the elephants that caught my attention was an elephant raised by David and Daphne Sheldrake in Kenya, meaning she was rescued from a poaching event when she was about 2 years old. Then she was raised up to adulthood. And, the elephants that they raise can go wild anytime they choose. The elephants make the choice, not the
Yeah.
humans. But so Eleanor was not the first. She was the fourth, I believe,
Mhm.
elephant that they rescued. But all of the elephants went back into the wild around the age elephants do, when they're sort of independent of each other, they get adopted by another wild herd. But Eleanor didn't. And she stayed behind. And she stayed behind for 33 years, helping Daphne Sheldrake raise, the hundreds and hundreds of baby elephants that were coming into their care. And one after the next was getting released into the wild. So I was so struck and stunned, if you will, that Eleanor had stayed back. And Eleanor was still, I don't think she had gone wild at the time when I was 8 years old. I was in 1980. And so, no, she went back later in the wild. So
Mhm.
she was still with Daphne at that time. And so then I began tracking the elephants, and I did it in a variety of ways. I'm a little kid raised on a farm in Hubbard, Oregon. We have no money. We're super poor. We're just farmers. And, but my dad is a scientist. And so, I began going to the library, which I love libraries still to this day. And I would look up any magazine article, any newspaper article, any encyclopedia entry, anything to do with elephants, or specifically those elephants there in Kenya. And I would copy them down in a notebook. So I basically write down like a bibliography, just every, place that I found anything about that elephant, and I would copy it word for word for word. And when you fast forward 20 years, one elephant turned into 200, it's more than 400 now. And one of the things that I did was I wanted to figure out about elephant behavior. What made Eleanor stay behind? Like, what was it? She did eventually go into the wild. She did eventually have 3 that we know of wild-born calves. But why did she stay back for 33 years? And so it's just, their minds were so fascinating to me. But then what was happening with all the elephants, like those that would be rescued together, just because elephants are put together in a situation doesn't mean they get along any more than humans put together in a jail cell or anywhere else would get along. So it was interesting how they would sort of seek out their friends and how those friendships would last their entire lifetime. So long after the elephants would be released into the wild, and I was tracing their elephant ears, and I learned how to do that in Cynthia Moss's amazing book. And then Dr. Joyce Poole, these incredible women scientists, and, Dr. Ian Douglas Hamilton, and just, his daughter, Saba Douglas Pope. I mean, these people, they were just doing these incredible, elephants were in their backyard, of course, but they were creating these ways to track and find them. So I was, tracing their ears, and then I would look for these elephants anytime they turned up in anyone else's research. And sure enough, as all these, scientists began converging in Kenya to study more elephants, they began finding these elephants, and sometimes they would put their ears in there. So I would use that paper, for example. But what I thought was the most fascinating about them as time continued, and the thing that I drew so much strength and courage from, was how they were able to stay together, how tight their bonds were, that long after they'd been released into the wild and when they would come back, they would still be together years later.
Mm-hmm.
Or one would be taking care of another's young because the other, female had obviously gotten killed. It was like they would make it through these horrific events. And in a way, it was sort of mirroring my life. I was making it through some horrific events in my life due to the addiction and due to the arrest and all of that.
And that's the beauty of this book. And we're going to go back to 26 here in a minute again. But you parallel your life with the lives of certain elephants in your book, like different struggles. Yeah, you're not, on the plains, foraging for food,
Right.
But it is an inner strength, a calling, your role in life, where you're supposed to be doing certain things in life. So at 26, when you're looking at what am I going to do the rest of my life, somebody asked you, what do you love? What do you love? You are stripped bare, like you said, of your dignity, your dreams, of everything. And somebody's trying to find that one grain of who you really are and what your heart really belongs to. And tell us about that.
So that was actually when I was 10 years sober, 36. And so I got sober on December 23rd, 1998.
Mm-hmm.
And then it literally took me, and people ask me all the time, what was the hardest thing I've ever done? And I have done some really, really hard things, but I was even facing 2 years in jail at one point, and that doesn't even feel as hard. The hardest thing I've ever done, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is to get sober and stay that way.
Yeah.
Over 23 years now.
Yeah.
And so, when I had 10 years sober, I, it literally took me about 10 years to sort of just figure out, how do I just live life on life's terms in this world, being sober, every day. I mean, how do I just go to a job every day and brush my teeth every day? I mean, that, weirdly enough, it takes some time to just kind of figure out the detail of how people live their lives.
Yeah.
Once I figured that out, it was about survival. I started a very successful company. I was doing airbrush tanning because I'm the whitest white girl I've ever met.
No, you bet you're mad. You settle down over there.
That's true. We're pretty white girls. That's right.
And I always nobody whiter than me. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I have always wanted to have that beautiful San Diego tan.
Yeah, me too.
So I started an airbrush tanning company, and Then after a couple of years, a law got changed in the state of Oregon that basically shut me down overnight. It was about 30 days in and I was out of business, and incredibly successful, making money hand over fist, giant 3,000 square foot house. I mean, I had it all and I lost all of it. I mean, just every last bit was just gone. And the lesson in that, and I'll say this really quickly, is that I learned that it's not losing everything is the hard part. Losing everything is actually the easiest part of losing everything, because that's just handing over keys. You're just handing keys to people. That's all you're doing. It's thinking about losing everything that is the struggle. And that's the hardest part of that. But the day that comes, it's actually quite easy. So I ended up, it was the recession. It was the height of the recession, 2007, 2008, right in there. And I went into a college class that a friend of mine told me if I took this one college class that I could get free healthcare for an entire year. And now I'm, I can't get a job. I can't hold a job. I'm getting laid off at every job I go, as the whole world was. And so I'm now desperate, and health insurance for a year sounds too good to pass up for a free class.
Sure.
So I take this class, and in this class, about halfway through that semester, the teacher, who happens to be a college counselor, sits us all down and says, like, what do you really want to do in life? Like, where do you want to go? And all I wanted to do was get my bills paid. I don't care what I have to do. I just need to work a job. I'll do any job. I don't care. I just want to get my bills paid. But he kept going and kept on me and kept on me. And he finally said, I want you to go back to what it was when you were 8 years old. And I want you to write down on a piece of paper what it was that 8-year-old Debbie Ethell wanted to be. And it was, I'm embarrassed. I was embarrassed when I wrote about it in the book that I had literally forgotten what it was I wanted to be when I was 8 years old, because that was my whole passion through my whole life.
Yeah.
But I got so distracted with making money and spending money and, accumulating things, because I had come from homelessness. So now I just wanted so much stuff, and I had so much stuff.
Yeah.
And then I realized how unhappy all of that stuff made me. It did not bring me happiness. That exact opposite, in fact, of what I thought all those things.
Because the stuff owns you. You
owns
lose yourself because your stuff owns you. And you're right. And you think that's going to make you feel better and fill that hole in your life or whatever. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I spent a lot of money and I don't feel better. In fact, probably worse, actually.
Worse. Yeah, when you have it, and I knew what it was like to pick myself up from the gutter. So that was like the second time I had to go back into a gutter, it felt like. And although it was not anything like the gutter that I came out of in 98.
Yeah.
So I was a bit different.
That was World War I trench warfare right there. Literally. Like when I read it, I'm like, oh my God, that she pulled out of this is a miracle. I mean, literally, you were on a path of oblivion. I mean, you just were on that.
Totally.
For whatever reason, whatever was driving you there. But again, I have such pride and joy that you made it through to the other side, because of what you've achieved and what you've been doing. So carry on about finding out what your passion at 8 and what you did with it.
So I ended up going back home, and he gave me, this counselor gave me some writing exercises to try and figure it out. And so I went home and I wrote some writing exercises, and then suddenly, and it was just like again, something like just kind of coming through me. I just wrote on a piece of paper in huge letters, Eleanor. And then I just completely burst into tears. I just started sobbing, and I ran up to my attic. I'd had another house by then that I was renting. And I ran up to this attic and started throwing boxes on my dining room table, and just like, oh my God, I hadn't looked at what had happened to these elephants. I hadn't even opened these boxes in a few years. And I suddenly felt so guilty that
Felt like you betrayed them.
I had betrayed them. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I quickly went through it. Then I go back into the counselor in Monday, on that Monday. And he's like, what'd you come up with? And, it was that I wanted to be a scientist. That's what it was. I wanted to be an elephant scientist. That's what I wanted to be. But I couldn't tell him right away, because I was so scared, because I knew it'd take a lot of math in order to become a scientist. And the truth was that I had gotten left behind in 5th grade math. And So when I went and took the math test, that's where I tested was 5th grade math. And it was a stunning revelation. Like I thought I was at least 8th grade math. I knew I was bad at math, but 5th grade was just a huge shock. So I had to start all the way back at like one of those mathnasium, places with a 7th grade math tutor who was brilliant and who taught me how to do baby math. And my God, that was so humbling because I had to
I
go.
was just going to say that would be like you're in 7th grade and I'm an adult and you're teaching me math. Okay, I've been humbled. Thank you, God. Thank you for that.
With a whole classroom of like other 7th graders. And they thought I was their teacher. And I'm like, oh, I lead no one in this group. I am not your leader. So,
I'm sorry.
So it was.
Can you help me? No, I don't have 5th grade math. Sorry, I'm not able to help you with that. Oh my God, I love that.
I didn't even know what a fraction was. So no, I would have been awful. And so that's I went back there. This counselor, his name is Casey Sims. I still, know him and talk to him to this day and go and talk in his classes. He was such a brilliant man because he literally held my hand and just kind of kept showing me the next step, not showing me the long road. He never, thank goodness he never told me, oh, you're going to have to take all these baby math classes for 2 years before you can take a single introduction science class. And had he shared that with me on that day, I never would have stayed.
Yeah.
But he shared the lily pads is what I call them. The next step. It was just the next step is all I could see. And, I just kept going. He showed me how to get a tutor. I had a tutor my whole time through school. But 6 years later, I made it through the top levels. I was one of the top in my class, made it through the top levels of statistics and calculus and physics.
Look at you starting off with 5th grade and rocking it. Literally.
Yeah, that was, I do feel like I do.
7th graders and said, take that. I can do statistics. So there.
I do feel like, I should get a gold medal for taking math every semester for 6 straight years. But I did. I did not take a single day off of math for 6 years. But I wanted to go as far as I needed to get my degree because my dream ever since I was a little kid was to be a scientist. But I never felt smart enough. And I never felt like I kept getting kicked out of colleges. I felt like that was a non-starter. And then I had a record, but I got out of school. I graduated in 2014. 2015, I started working these really crappy jobs. And my parents were so funny because they were like, you have this degree, you could go work these bigger jobs. And I'm like, I needed to keep myself poor because I knew what I was doing was I was going after this nonprofit. I was going to found this nonprofit.
Okay,
and
so what year were you thinking you were going to start this? Because you founded it in 2015, but when were you thinking I'm going to do this? At what year?
Probably 2014. It was just days after I graduated. I was on a plane to Kenya to go find the elephants, Eleanor included, that I had followed since I was 8 years old. And when I was there, that was just a trip. I mean, like just a trip, not a trip.
Yeah.
It was sort of both.
Yeah.
But while I was there, it was sort of like, what do I do now? I've come here, I've seen Kenya, I've been here, and it resonated with my soul as it does with so many people that go there for the first time. But I
always say people who go to Africa, and I have some people who are going over to Zambia with me this year. I said, this is the one thing I want to tell you before you get there. You will have a soul reset when you put your foot on the ground. I can't explain it, but everything that matters and doesn't matter just all comes into clear vision, crystal clear, like, oh, I was really stressing about that. Crap. It is a soul reset, changes your perspective of life, the world. I get it. I totally hear what you're saying.
Yes, that's exactly true. And having, excuse me, having just come through that whole losing everything thing, then being in school for 6 straight years, money was not going to be the thing that I was going to chase. I was no longer interested in that. And it needed to be changing the world in some way. And the only thing that I felt like I could do, because by then, I had about 15, 16 years sober, I decided, it was the elephants that saved my life in so many ways. And so now I felt like I had betrayed them by not getting my degree sooner. But now it was so necessary to be able to do whatever I could to help them. So I thought, I'm going to try this in a nonprofit, and I learned how to set up a nonprofit. And so I started doing that right when I got back in 2014, and I got back in the summer of 2014. But then I ended up, so I ended up setting that up. I started working these odd jobs, just these random odd jobs to stay poor so that I could stay on task and stay on mission and use the greatest brain cells that I had left for the creating the nonprofit. So that was, my goal. And so I did that. But to back up a little bit, when I was a junior in college, I read this book called Keepers of the Ark. And this book floored me in such a huge way. So I wanted to name my foundation Keepers of the Ark, but I couldn't find the author because he wrote it under initials. So I couldn't find him to ask him for permission. So it was such a perfect title because it seemed like that's what we are, right? We are keepers of the ark. We have the ability to let elephants go extinct, or we have the ability to save them. And I truly believe it is up to us, humans, not Americans, but humans. And so I, instead of just naming it after his book, I named it KOTA. So it's the KOTA Foundation for Elephants. And I founded it KOTA, yes, Keepers of the Ark. And then we made our focus on education in the United States. And the reason why I did that was because I was out talking to people about elephants all the time. I was telling them about these elephants that I had that I had watched the Sheldricks rescue. Yeah. And I was telling people these stories. These were incredible stories. And nobody knew about them. And no one knew what elephants were capable of. Yeah. So all of that, I felt like, okay, we need to kind of start all the way back at square one. And so we started with, I started going into schools, but then I realized we need to think bigger. I'm only one person. I can't just keep going into schools and just every day. So that wasn't going to work. We needed also to have projects on the ground in Kenya. And so our first project was we brought in, I raised enough money to buy desks for 6 separate schools. Huge, which is awesome. 900 kids get a seat in a desk. Yeah. And this is in a very, very rural part of Kenya. What people didn't realize, and I think a lot of people still don't realize, is that, kids and most adults in these countries that have elephants, Kenya, Tanzania, have never seen an elephant before. It's true. Much more Americans have seen elephants than the people that are there.
It's funny you say that because in something I want to bring up, because I feel like I'm talking to myself listening to you. Our foundations started the same year. You talking and thinking about it was when I was thinking about it, and we had this higher calling, this pull to do something on a bigger scale. And you're absolutely right, because we just completed our second school, and one of the things we're doing with the kids is actually taking them into the national park to see their animals. You're right. A lot of them, it's like living in San Diego and never having seen the beach, having never gone there. You're like, what? No, I've never been to the beach. But you live. Yeah. So it's amazing. Yeah. They live, there's some areas where we have human elephant conflict areas, but for the most part, a lot of them never seen them. You're absolutely right.
Sure. And we expect, they expect us to do the same thing. We expect people, okay, well, why don't you solve this problem? It's in your backyard. But how can you fix the ocean if you've never seen the ocean? Why would you care? You don't see it. It's not there. It's not your main concern. So, and yet elephants are absolutely vital to humans surviving at the same time. And there's this huge disconnect about that too. Like, oh yeah, elephants are cute and they're nice to look at, but who really cares if they all get exterminated off the planet? Well, they're a keystone species, so it changes the entire ecological system of everywhere they are. We have lots of countries, like where you're from, Ethiopia, that used to have lots of elephants that have no elephants now. That's right. One of the most, and Somalia is another one of these regions that become these barren wastelands, just barren wastelands. Droughts get way worse, not just because of climate change, but because you remove something like an elephant that has the ability to, to grow more vegetation, that creates more water, that creates more weather systems, kind of like a beaver does here, kind of like a wolf does here.
They clean up areas, they move stuff.
Absolutely.
They are critical.
They're critical to human survival.
To the health of the environment. You remove them, everything just goes to, you know what, end of
Yeah.
story.
It's true. And so, then you also have the ivory aspect of it, which is a huge human, conflict toll. So, this is a huge problem as well, as we all know. So, yeah, it's, now, so we did start, so then we started doing a thing called the elephant in the room, which is not to get it confused with, that great film, that documentary, The Elephant in the Living Room. Ours
Yeah.
is just The Elephant in the Room, on YouTube, which are a series of 12 episodes, 3 to 5 minutes, covering topics that I find really fascinating about elephants, or having to do with elephants, not just, an elephant's trunk or, a foot, but, concepts like the fact that Kenyan
Mhm.
children don't see elephants. So
Yeah.
we did some of that. And then we passed a law in the state of Oregon. We were the 6th state to do so. We worked really hard to get that law passed to ban the sale of ivory in Oregon. The bad news is that law actually does absolutely nothing
So
to stop ivory.
how do you approach that? Because I wrote that in my notes, because I've heard this from other states. They pass the law, they're all gung ho, but there's no teeth to the laws. So what do you do now to make it more impactful and actually do what it's supposed to do?
There's a few ways, and your viewers will have to forgive me if I don't know all of them. But it's much, much harder to go out and get a brand new law passed and put on the books than it is to change an existing law that's already on the books.
Mhm.
In Oregon, and I can just speak for our law, I can compare it to, say, California's or Washington's. So California's got a locked in law, and so does Washington. So we're squished right there in the middle with really nothing. And we're seeing a lot of ivory from Washington and California coming over the borders that are both open, by the way. So anybody can do that, and then selling their ivory here in Oregon. In Oregon, the ivory law is it's a civil law, meaning it only attaches civil penalties. And the only way so if you talk to, like, the United States, the Humane Society of the United States, and they're the ones who were the big pushers of the law. I get frustrated with that a lot because I adore them as a group, but they'll say, "Oh, no, the law has teeth. The law has teeth." Okay, this is how I determine whether or not any law, I don't care if it's this law or any law, has teeth.
Mhm.
If I find illegal ivory, I can point to 10 antique stores within 5 miles of where I'm sitting right here. All of them have illegal ivory. Now, I don't think they mean to have illegal ivory. I think the laws are incredibly confusing. They change all the time. This is a wildlife trafficker's dream. But needless to say, they all have illegal ivory in these antique stores. So who do I call? What I want to know when I find illegal ivory is, who do I call to get that ivory taken out? And so
Well,
that we no longer sell this illegal ivory.
I'm
We're
going
gonna
to I'm going to step in and I'm going to give you help with this, because we had a situation here a few years ago with a gallery called Carlton Gallery in La Jolla. And
Yes,
guess
I
what?
remember.
They had ivory in that, and we picketed and we shut them down. They
Yeah.
closed shop, and he
Mhm.
got a huge fine. They found more stuff like in a warehouse and all that stuff.
Yes, that was
So
a huge
you
case.
bring it was a huge case. So what you do is you go to these stores, you talk to them and say, "Hey, letting
Mhm.
you know you've got a legal ivory. Now you can get rid of it properly, give it to the government authorities, or we're going to take a stand here."
Mhm.
Because once people see, "Oh my God, I don't want to touch that stuff because people will come down on me like a box of rocks." I highly recommend it. It took us a few months to do it. We were there every weekend without fail. But guess
Right.
what? It worked. So you might want to think about that.
No, totally. And these are great tricks that you can do. It takes a lot of time to do that.
Sure
We can
does.
also get the law changed. And so there's so basically what I was going to say too is that there isn't anybody that we can actually call. So the US Fish and Wildlife, they deal with interstate commerce crossing state lines. So if you get caught taking an illegal tusk from Oregon into Washington, which is just a highway, there's just like,
Yeah.
"Hey, welcome to Washington" sign.
Yeah.
There's no checkpoint. Then, and they catch you there on the border. Yep, they can do something. U.S. Fish and Wildlife did get involved in a case that we had here locally. And what it was an estate sale that was selling 2 raw, uncarved tusks that were taller than I stand. and literally had it for sale on their website. And I was suffering that day from like humongous fever. I had like 102-degree fever. I was so sick.
You
And one of
thought,
my
am I
volunteers,
delirious? Am I
yeah,
hallucinating? Am I really reading this? Like what?
it's true. I could not believe what I was
Yeah.
seeing. And one of my volunteers contacted me and said, "Oh my gosh, you got to look at this." We sent a bunch of people down there to go look at it. And sure enough, it was absolutely illegal tusks that somebody was selling and it just lit out in the open. Like, didn't even think about, anybody following them. I contacted the head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife here in this state. And just because they had a court case that day, they pulled one guy off of that who the court case fell through. So he suddenly had a free afternoon. He went down there and they made the bust. But the problem is that, there is so much money in this illegal wildlife trafficking trade, as you well know. It is the third
$25
largest,
billion a
billions and
year.
billions and billions of dollars. It is,
Yeah.
it's behind only drugs and guns in this
Yep.
country. That's it.
Yep.
And ivory is a humongous part of this wildlife trafficking
And I
problem.
want to stop you there for 1 second because I want to make a connect with the viewers and listeners about what those big tusks mean and the wreckage behind those big tusks. So, for instance, last time I was in Zambia, a guy who had spent a lot of time in Zambia was there. He worked for an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And in this one period in the 80s, 17,000 elephants were wiped out of the South Luangwa area. 17,000.
Yeah.
So much so that the genetics changed so dramatically with those animals that they're about 2 to 3 feet shorter than the ones in the same country at Kafue National Park. This is what happens. And everybody, of course, wants the big tusks. When you take the big tuskers out, most of them are gone now. They've been killed, poached, all that. The genetics change. You get weaker animals. You get kind of like second rate DNA, basically, because all the strong ones have been killed. They haven't been able to mate enough to carry on the lineage. So it happens when you kill the head of a pride, a lion. When trophy hunters take out one lion, there
They
are
take out
10
a whole bunch.
animals the 10 animals die behind that
Yeah.
because the competitive male comes in, kills
And
the
kills all
babies.
the cubs.
So
Yeah.
so when you see something like, oh wow, there's ivory there, peel back that black curtain and look at the bloodshed behind it and the wreckage that somebody wreaked by having those tusks, killing that one animal, destroying the strength of the DNA and the genetics of the animals. I mean, you got to think a few steps past what you see or hear.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And so, so when you look at like a state like Oregon, we have 6, maybe 8, I might be getting that wrong, but it's less than 10 officials in the entire state of Oregon that are U.S. Fish and Wildlife officials that deal with poaching.
Yeah.
And that's for the entire state. So in Oregon, we've got forests, we've got mountains. So we've got mountain lions and elk and all poaching of bears. We have poaching of all kinds of things here. And you got 6 guys. And where do you think they're at during hunting season or right at hunting season? They're not here looking for ivory.
Right.
There isn't anybody who can actually tackle. I mean, there is if there was enough money. If there was enough money, we could tackle all of this. And
so I mean, why you say that? Have you ever thought, now that you're saying it, again, I feel like our lives are paralleled in so many ways. Isn't there a way that a watchdog organization can be created in these states to fill the gap with so few fish and game people? Like in San Francisco, they have 3 fish and game people at the docks checking for illegal contraband coming in. 3 working San Francisco's port. Thanks a lot. That'll get you nothing and a cup of coffee. So is there a way to create watchdog organizations that are under the umbrella of the government?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is. It takes a lot of structure. It takes a lot of planning, but absolutely. And there's lots of, I believe, beginnings of that happening right now in all different ways. I mean, we're seeing ivory being bought and sold like crazy on the internet. So there's organizations going after Visa, going after MasterCard, eBay, Facebook, I see it. I do a search once a week. I find so much of it that I just can't even. So whatever's happening isn't working, in my opinion, very well. And it's not enough of a deterrent for anybody to do it, surely. Right. The other thing, and that's something that we're focused on as a project in the future, is we would like, to, first of all, the rules are different for every single kind of ivory. So if you have marine mammal ivory, that's under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So that's walrus ivory, sperm whale ivory, all of the
Hippo teeth stuff. Yeah.
yes, that's all under. And then you have hippo teeth, which is separate.
Yeah.
Warthog ivory is pretty much legal everywhere.
Yeah.
Then you have, mammoth ivory, that's legal everywhere. Now we're seeing we're seeing mammoth ivory actually when it's being broken down and tested, it's actually brand new ivory. It's not mammoth ivory. It's just made to look like mammoth ivory. So so if you're an illegal trafficker and you're trying to get ivory into a market, get it into the legal market,
Yeah.
just siphon it all in there, and
Yeah.
you make a lot of money. So we're trying to get, it's another project that I'd really like to raise some money for, is just to do an entire ivory series and just go through all of the different, just to show how confusing it is.
Yeah.
But if you're a trafficker, this is your paradise. You want it to be confusing.
Yeah.
So you can sell anything you want to. And like I said, I don't think that a lot of the antique store owners are, purposely selling illegal ivory. I think some are, sure, but I think a lot of them aren't. They're just selling someone's ivory, not thinking about it. We know that this estate sale was absolutely participating in the wildlife trafficking trade. No question. They've gotten busted a couple years earlier than we got them for doing tiger paws, and they got busted. So this shut them down, luckily. However, there isn't an organization. When you have a law that's a civil law, going back to the law, they're just, you can't get it in front of a court. So you could try to go after somebody and they would just say, well, they could actually go after you for going after them because you've now harmed them somehow. You've got to get the law changed. So you get the law changed to a criminal law so you can actually attach penalties. It's expensive because if you're going to make a law a criminal law, you have to write in, where is that money going to come from to prosecute? So, but we can copy the law in Washington, and, we can mimic, laws that in other states that have been passed. Unfortunately, most of the states that have passed ivory laws have passed these civil laws, and people think the law is passed, and so they walk away. My question is find a piece of illegal ivory and then figure out, who do you call? And if there isn't anyone to call, then that ivory law, I don't care who defends it. If there isn't something that I can do to get the ivory removed, that's just a crap law. And I'm a little bit exhausted about, working so hard on things that mean absolutely nothing, right? We're short on time.
And let me walk it through, since my foundation is over in Africa where it all starts, coming over here. So let me just give you a scenario. You have countries that are in abject poverty. They make maybe a couple $100 a year, if they're lucky. Asian criminal syndicates come in, and what they do is, and also countries like China, sorry, I'm calling you out because they are colonizing Africa right now.
Yeah.
So they come in and say, hey, you want $20? Here's $20. We need an elephant. And $20 might as well be $20,000 or $200,000 to these people. So they're trying to live and feed their kids. So they go out and they take these animals. We're not going after the poachers who are literally trying to survive. I understand that, but we're trying to show them other ways to take care of their families. So that ivory then is taken out, and they've gotten so sophisticated in Africa. Same thing with the rhino horn. They roar in, they hack the face off of the animal, literally hacking their faces off with machetes and other stuff. So the animal is alive while being brutalized, traumatizing all the animals around them, their babies, their sisters and brothers. It is the most heinous thing you've ever seen. They take that, and that ivory or that rhino horn in some instances is off the continent in 6 hours. They are so sophisticated now. So what's happening is Africa is being ravaged. When I was a kid in Ethiopia, there were 10 million elephants on the continent, and we have under 300,000. We're losing 100 a day and 3 rhinos a day. Rhinos number anywhere between 20 and 25,000. Extinction is happening. So we need to get our, together over here in the US to help stem the flow of all this wildlife trafficking, contraband coming over, the pangolins and everything. So we have to really get our stuff together here to really help Africa, because if you don't have a buyer or it's so hard, they'll say, oh, no, don't sell it in America because they will come down on you like a box of rocks. You want to determine every single point. So we just can't have these laws on paper that sound really good and absolutely do nothing. So we as people who want to change the world have to come up with a game plan. Like you suspect illegal ivory, call this number, an 800 number, and you might get a reward, because we have a reward system too where we are.
I think it's great. And I love that point that point that you make, because I see this all the time across Facebook, and everyone's kill the poacher. Who the heck is the poacher? And it's not a person. It is an entire group of people. And we did an episode on this on our show, but it's a huge group of people. We want to go after the kingpins, but ultimately, okay, there's bigger organizations than us doing that and doing great work doing so. If we get the money back into the hands of the regular people, if we allow them some form of industry, of which there is very little in some of these places, which is why poaching is out of control.
Yeah.
If we make something, we know that the cost of elephant tusks, is around $100,000. That's some seriously good sized elephant tusks, by the way. They're not as large.
There aren't much any big ones anymore because they're gone.
They're not as big ones, exactly. So let's just pretend they're $100,000. All right, that's what you get forever. That's the end of that elephant. That gets spread between all these different groups of people, with the kingpin getting the most at the end of the chain. If you let that elephant live, it's worth about $2 million in tourist revenue. And we all know this. So
thank you.
So, the point is to also get that information. But how are you going to tell somebody who's starving with their family, oh, let this guy live, even though you just got offered more money than you can make in 10 years to kill it, when you're literally starving and your kid has a few weeks to live? Mm-hmm. So we started a store called Products with a Purpose on our website, on the KOTA Foundation website. And one of the things that I worked really hard on was making these connections with these different groups, women-run, women-owned businesses primarily. I think we sell all from but one or maybe two that also employ men or that are run by men. But all of them are run by women, or these items are made by them, and then sold, because we needed a way. We did this during COVID. It was something we were going to do in the future, but when COVID happened, all bets were off, and so we started this project instead. So I found a company that had the export permit to help me get the goods over here through the exporter, and then we sell them, and then that money goes right back to these people. I know a lot of these people, so I can go there myself and see, is their quality of life actually changing because we are selling their products? I'm not interested in just selling all these strangers' products and being another Walmart. We're going to be out of products all the time. We are out all the time because I want to only pay people per piece they make, so they get to decide how much they make. And they get to bring their kids to work, and they get free healthcare, and it's fair trade certified, and it checks all the boxes, right? And then I thought, if I did this, how could this not be a huge hit here? Because it not only helps us as a foundation, and nobody in my foundation gets paid, including me, so that every dollar that comes into our foundation goes to these projects. So it's a great way to support two foundations with one amazing product, and the products are amazing. This is one of them, which is
amazing, which is made out of cars at the side of the road. It's a metal product. And you and I, when we had first met, I said, we have a Ethell Wildlife Women's Sewing Program, and
I love it.
We want to ramp up. Yeah, because you're right. We want to get these women. And that's what we did. And Ethell came in addressing the economic opportunities situation. So once people had an income, a source of income or training, they were less likely to poach. It's really working. When you address the food on the table, then you've got their attention. So, so I'm hoping
you bring in people like Tira Rudder, Art for Elephants, you start getting these tourist groups in there, and then, spreading that money throughout the community. Lewa Conservation does an incredible job with this in Kenya, spreading the money to all of the Maasai tribes when you stay and I try to stay at those places, because I know that money is going to the community as a whole, not just the people that work in that safari what is it called? Not a resort, hotel or whatever you stay in.
Yeah,
So,
like an eco lodge or whatever.
so
Yeah,
it's so important to try to, we're trying to go a lot of different ways, but they're all so equally important. And so
yeah,
all of them come back to one thing, which is, educating and helping people survive and picking up schools and, removing the barriers to education along the way. And trying to educate people here in the United States. United States is number 2 behind China. So that's something that's interesting for
yeah.
the wildlife
Literally, like,
trafficking.
who are we to talk about what China's doing when look at what we're doing? I mean, seriously, we really
Right.
can't point fingers. We are so
Right.
lax in our
But
due diligence here.
it does give us a great opportunity.
Yeah,
And that is that, there's a lot of great groups right now that are working in these, Asian countries, trying to, educate them exactly like what we're trying to do
yeah.
here. But if you go back to even, oh gosh, that great interview you did with Jeff Kramer a couple weeks ago,
Oh,
and
the
the
conservation game.
conservation game.
Oh boy.
So, and I love a lot of the comments that you had on that, which was so great because so few people make this connection that wildlife trafficking, endangered species, some zoos,
Yeah,
everybody can own a tiger in their garage kind of
literally.
thing,
Yeah,
like that. That is contributing to the problem as a whole. If you took out the United States, if you took out ivory in the United States, no, we wouldn't take out ivory in the whole wide world. There's countries that are doing way more
but a
amount of
big
ivory
slug
per
of it.
capita than we
But
have.
a
But
big slug
exactly,
of it. Yeah,
you would knock the knees out of the market. You would knock the
exactly.
knees right out of the market. And you do that on most things. If we actually had politicians that A, knew the problem, and that B, had the courage to stand up to the enormous wildlife trafficking lobby,
Yeah.
which are the tiger kings, the people that keep these animals, in these tiny cages and barns. I mean, just out where I live, out in this rural area, I heard a statistic recently by a wildlife officer out here who said there was something like 250 tigers
Yeah.
right here, just
Yeah.
in barns out here.
More
I mean,
tigers in the US than in the wild.
more
You
tigers in
can
the US than
literally
in the
buy them
wild.
out of an ad in Texas, like the classified. You looking for a tiger cub? Here. I'm like, what?
Exactly.
What am I reading? What am I? It's mind
Well, and
blowing.
and it goes back to, again, once people know, I believe in humanity and I believe in the goodness of people. I always have. In most cases. But
Yeah.
I believe in the goodness of people. When they know better, they will do better. When they know that this is a problem, they will put their money or their vote behind someone that can change the problem. And so I feel like with all of this issue, going back to like Tiger King conservation, it kind of comes back to one thing, and I'm really starting to ramp up a campaign on this, is to stopping the breeding programs. These captive
Oh
breeding
yeah.
programs are just
Seriously.
contributing to all of it, and
Yeah.
times 1,000. So if you go in and you ask, any organization that has a captive breeding program, which any zoo that's AZA accredited has a captive breeding program because they have to have that AZA accreditation. Um, how many of those animals ever go back into the wild? Do any of them?
No.
And you would find, I'd say 99.9% never, ever, ever go back into the wild. So therefore, what exactly are we breeding those animals for? And the answer to that is horrifying. And the answer to that is why we have the conservation game,
Yeah.
and why we have the Tiger King, is because there is added incentive and billions of dollars behind that to make sure that stays, it stays business as usual. So we do need to change that. And my thought was always, it's not necessarily changing it from the little kids. That's important, but that's like also putting desks in schools and removing barriers to education in Kenya, also very important. But it is education across the whole way.
And that's something. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I make some of your points and the importance of your foundation very clear. Your foundation really drives education, educating people about what's going on in the world, really educating them about elephants, the situations, the good, the bad, the ugly. Because you're right, a lot of people, when they hear something, they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea." Like, you can see in
Yep.
their eyes, like it's clicking and like ding, like, what did you just say? Like, what?
Yep.
There are more tigers in the US than there are in the wild. What? I didn't know that. So you want I am a firm believer, and me being in a small foundation, and boy, is it hard to raise money. Trust me, especially in a COVID world. And
Yes.
there are some organizations that are very successful, make a lot of money. What I ask, I plead, look for organizations like KOTA Foundation that are actually using your dollars with the impact of 10 in the field.
Yes.
Smaller foundations are hyper creative about getting the word out. Nobody works harder. Like you said, your US operations, nobody's making any money over here. Lord knows I'm not. I'm giving a lot of money, but I'm sure not making a lot of money. But
Yes.
support foundations that are actually creating change and not sending you 5 calendars in 1 year, have
No.
these fat cat salaries. Their
No.
marketing is budget is bigger than probably that of Cameroon. Don't support them. Don't. Just
Yeah, I
don't.
agree.
They've
If I get a
they've
mailing from,
lost the plot. These groups have lost the plot.
I
Get
mean,
to
yeah.
the organizations like COTA that have a clear vision of what they're trying to achieve, who they're trying to impact, and how to do it.
Well, and I will say this, there's a huge barrier to enter here, and there are change makers in the world like me, and that have such a struggle. And I'm going to use you as an example too, in Sefu. But it's set up like I go after and I try to apply for grants, and I spend 90% of my time applying for grants. I make my money by working odd jobs and by writing books, and that's how I make my money.
Yep.
If I and 90% of my time is just researching grants that, hey, we're never going to qualify for. And if we get invited to apply, the average time for one grant in Oregon, a big funder in Oregon, is 66 hours I have to dedicate to
Yeah.
of my time
Yeah.
to apply for this grant, which means that all the companies that are applying for that grant hire professional grant writers. That's who
Right.
I'm going up against.
Yeah.
So
Same with us.
imagine, and this
Yeah.
is where I love people to think, like, imagine what we could create if we were funded. If we actually got funding, if I could actually spend my 40 hours or 80 hours a week on pushing the projects forward instead of doing Google searching on more grants and talking to more people about, going through these interviews and then filling out the grants and then getting declined for the grants. If I could, and I'm a great grant writer, by the way, and I've secured, hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money. But over the time that we've been here,
I feel like I'm talking to myself.
It's no money.
If I had the marketing budget of one of the big ones with all the calendars, I could have Southern Africa dialed in. I literally could. This is what infuriates me is like there are people like you out there slugging away where if your attention was not just sitting there writing grant, but actually doing the stuff you want to do, oh my God, you'd be moving at Mach 5,
We would be. And the other thing is that I always look at, I'll be putting up a video on this, but I always look at the tax returns of everyone I donate to, because we get most of our donations from, little people, $10, $20, and it's such an amazing thing.
Yes.
And so, but that's how much I've ever had to donate, because I've never had, money except at one point in my life. And so when I'm donating my money, I don't want to donate my 10 valuable dollars that I worked really hard to earn to an organization that pays their executive director 5 times what I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
So that makes me
red
crazy.
flag. Red
That
flag.
just makes me crazy. So, and that's kind of, where we were going with ours. That we didn't want to, I didn't want to do that from the get-go. We might pay somebody at some point to run things, but even then it should be lower than what anybody at a for-profit corporation gets paid to run that corporation. Because we are, what we're doing here is trying to change the world, not trying to get rich changing the world. We'll go work for a corporation if we want to go get rich, make all the money you want. But here we're trying to change the world.
Yeah. And that's why I was, I'm so winding up here. I feel so blessed and so lucky that I got to meet you. Your story is so inspiring. Again, you have a best-selling book called The Will of Heaven, an inspiring true story about elephants, alcoholism, and hope. It was so successful. You have 2 more books that you're writing and will be coming out. It's a trio of a trilogy, basically, of your work and your stories. And you created this foundation called KOTA, KOTA Foundation. And you are educating, you're empowering, and you are on the ground hustling. And anybody who gets out there, wakes up every day like, what can I do today? How can I create change. I want people on this show who are literally changing the game of conservation. They have new ideas, they have new strength and new energy, and I just feed off of it because I'm like, oh my god, I'm learning so much good stuff. I hope I shared some good stuff. This is how we're going to change the world,
I
is
agree.
sharing these stories, sharing
Yeah.
ideas. And we're so excited that you were on, and I can't wait to share this and get the podcast out all over the world and have people learn about you and the great work.
Thank
You're
you,
so inspiring. You're so inspiring, Debbie. Seriously, I encourage everybody to read this book because it really just cuts right into you. I mean, it's brutally honest,
thank
but
you.
it's so hopeful. And congratulations on starting your foundation. I'm really proud of you. I know how hard it is firsthand. Oh my God. Like what was I doing when I said, I think I'm going to start an anti-poaching foundation on the other side of the world? Next time I have an idea like that, just whack me over the head because
It's true. It's so hard.
literally, I wake up like, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? And I'm thinking, okay, I guess I'm in. So I'm in to win. I'm going to do it, but I can still relate with what you're talking about, the grant writing and all that.
Oh yeah.
So Debbie Ethell, my special guest, she's the founder of KOTA, KOTA Foundation. Please check out her website, kotafoundation.org. Please check out her book. I can't wait for the second one to come out. And I hope when will the second one come out? Any idea?
Ooh, I am about 3/4 of the way through the second and the third. I'm writing them consecutively. And then I think there's going to be more. I honestly, the story is not close to being done at 3. And so, I hope to have it out by this time next year. So I think conservatively, I think if we say beginning of 2023.
All right. Well, you're booked. You're coming back. So we're going to talk about number 2. That's awesome. So Debbie, a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing great ideas and inspiring. And thank you to our sponsors, Attorney King Amanpour, who I adore, Saquon Casino, IB Fitness, and Nikki Rottens for making this podcast happen and this audio and video segment. So Debbie, keep me posted. Please stay in touch, and we'll get our women's sewing project to get you stuff to put on your site, and we'll make it all work. We'll just make the world better for everybody.
Love it. Love it.
All right.
Thank you.
Much love. Thanks, dear. See you soon.